Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. Another week is in the books. The MLQ season is somehow streaming to its end. One match and one completed game away from championships, which is kind of hard to believe at this point. But we've got a lot to break down. We're just going to kind of be mixing up the format a little bit today for a couple reasons. If you joined us last week, we kind of gave the North Division kind of the spotlight for the entire week. We broke down team by team. This week, with the East Division winding down, except for one non-completed game, we're going to be giving East Division the highlight. That also gives us a chance to kind of go through the South film as it comes up from this past weekend. We'll combine that with the series next week and kind of break it all down as a South breakdown in a week. So it's going to be a East Division focused episode. With that said, my one burning question for the two of you guys is not based on record or anything like that, just based purely on right now performance. If you're just a power rank, who is the best team in the East Division? I'll do Nick first.
I have to feel like it's Boston right now. I think they're the ones who have shown each series that they've come to play. Washington kind of struggled a little bit out of the gate and has since put their foot to the floor a little bit more. But it's still, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in that game 3. I'm not saying Boston will win that game 3. But I do think that Boston has had the most consistent results, and they've dropped 2 games all season total, right? 1 to New York and 1 to Washington so far. So I would say Boston.
Jack?
Yeah, I think it's also Boston. I'm tempted to say Washington has the most top-line talent because I think when everything is working right, they do. But Boston has just shown more consistently that they can put the pieces together and work as a team, beaters and chasers together to get results on the field. I think they've bounced back really well from a difficult season last year and are looking like real title contenders right now.
I'll tell you what scares me if you want to highlight them as real title contenders. It is 3-7-2, their snitch on pitch record this season. They have caught 3 snitches in 12 games, and they've allowed the other teams to catch 7. We've seen a couple different strategic approaches for how they, kind of went about that. This week they were kind of using the Max Havlin Lewis Shoe line to start. Last time against Washington, Max Havlin literally wasn't even available because he was coaching on the other sideline in a non-jersey, so he wasn't confused for a player. So, they seem to be still figuring that out. They did get a catch by Tyler Beckman this weekend, but it's at least to our knowledge that Tyler Beckman's not going to be available at championships. So the questions abound right now, and because Harry Greenhouse is also really badly needing the quaffle game. Nick, is there anything that worries you about this Boston team?
Yeah, I mean, how can physicality not be a concern for this Boston team? We thought coming into this weekend this year that Harry Greenhouse, Taylor Crawford back-to-back was going to give you solid point defense all the way through. John Jackson looked like he was just untouchable this weekend. And that's a problem. I mean, there's a couple of plays where players got into the lane without even facing a hit that they frankly should have been tackled long before and were able to take free shots right in the middle of it. And I mean, as you go up against these teams we talked a little bit about the physicality shifting away from the South and maybe a little bit more towards the East Division. But if you're not going to hit, right, it's a problem. Because we saw what happened when Devin Lee and Tate K, right, and Tessa and Carey were all able to play against sort of even-ish in the quaffle game, or in the beater game. New York was able to go on these runs to either start off the game strong or get back into it. And that's when you need your physicality.
Yeah, I'll jump in and disagree a little bit there. I think I think you're right that we weren't seeing the type of point defense that we might expect from a roster that has players like Taylor Crawford and Peter Lawrence. But I think in other spots, the Forge we're bringing some pretty big hits this weekend, especially in the keeper zone. Ryan Fenning was flying everywhere. launching into tackles. And then also they pick their spots to pressure the midline and force some key resets and I think a turnover or two on the Titans. Players like Morgan Bertram were stepping up and just being aware of their surroundings and using the MLQ rule set to their advantage. I thought it was. I thought it was. There were moments of physicality that reassured some of my concerns about Boston heading into the season.
Yeah, I was also going to highlight kind of Fenning kind of stepping up this week. We've seen him have a slow start to the season for sure. I think we've highlighted that already on replay a couple times. Good to see him both offensively and defensively stepping it up. But I do see where Nick's coming from with the physicality angle. Since you kind of made the brief case for Washington and Nick had made the case for Boston, I will make the case for New York, which is that we still haven't seen, I think, like the best New York. What we saw when Tate K stepped on the pitch this weekend is that Tate K is still the player he was a year ago when he went in for his injury. He's 80%. Look, you can tell he's a little bit of step slow, still getting back in the game, and he was still dominating entire stretches of it. And that's against, one of the best there's not a lot of beater cores as good as Boston's. Like KK is not going to have to deal with a lot of beater cores any better than Boston's. And Devin Lee continues to perform. Obviously, not having Rachel Allen-Silver, I think, is probably the number one argument you would make that they're not the best team. I think if Rachel was healthy, that this is the best team in the East, because along with that beating, along with that consistency, John Jackson, they're seeking game. Eight catches to their names already. That's going to be the most in the league going into championships this year. I do not believe San Antonio could pass them with 3 catches this week, but outside of that, it's going to be the most in the league. Those are the kind of things you need to do at championships. So I do think this team has a high ceiling. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Nick, I wanted to get your feelings as we let's go a little bit more into the actual series itself, which Boston did win 2-1, winning games 1 and 3. First 2 games, very back and forth affairs. Boston kind of blew the roof off the house in game 3 and kind of ran away with it. We've been talking all season about the East Division defensive sets. There was a dynamism to the way that these teams were switching through their sets this weekend, trying different things with presses within their sets, etc. Jack mentioned the kind of 2-2 hybrid Boston was using at times that was trying to get just quick pushover resets. New York set a couple sideline traps that were very basketball-esque. 2 players kind of cutting off both corners with a beater who's kind of there to pick up the problems. What are you seeing from these defenses, and how does it kind of differ from what we've generally seen in Quidditch when it comes to defense?
I mean, this is what you and I have been asking for a year and a half at this point, and that is to play multiple different defenses in a game, and just change up the looks as consistently as possible to make teams panic. We saw a little bit of that from both of these teams this weekend, right? We saw a couple of forced shots from New York, which goes basically against everything we've seen from New York for 5 years at this point, right? They are the patient, slow team. And this year they're not. And it's really fun to watch. But we saw the same from Boston, right? When New York breaks out that trap, you'll see Boston kind of panics a little and throws up these lofted passes, which does allow the speed of a Devin Lee, a Tessa Mullins, a Tate K to close in on that passing option. And it really does make it a lot more difficult to score. But on the other side of it, there's some pretty serious defensive breakdowns happening because of this switch up, right? It is a lot of communication, and it's very difficult to tell your entire team what you are doing in each play exactly and sharply. And we've seen some things that we don't normally see from teams of these calibers. We see 2-2s where both defenders are guarding one hoop. We see hoop zones where one defender goes flying out and the other one spreads out to a mark and leaves a wide open shot. So I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting things, but with that comes the trade-offs of these sort of defensive lapses that we might see, which has led to these relatively high-scoring games.
Yeah, and I think New York is kind of using their enormous talent to kind of fill holes to some degree in this defense. I mean, we've talked a lot about John Jackson, Leo Freed both being very good, shot blockers and pass blockers around the hoops for this team. One thing that I think goes overlooked, and I know sometimes it's like boring to talk about superstars, but Lindsay Morella looks so effortless in this defense. Sometimes it just seems like she's just sitting in a passing lane all the time, and it's not. Nobody can be sitting in a passing lane all the time in a complex mark defense that has fading people in and out on the weak side. She's doing that because her game sense is otherworldly. And the way that things like that work in this defense, I mean, Frank Minson's another ridiculous athlete within this team that can kind of get to places. That's why this team is, able to do kind of the things they are with the defenses they're playing.
Yeah, I mean, Lindsay Morella is sort of she's playing almost a free safety role in this defense, and it's really, really fun to watch. Grace Dastu did this for Boston in 2019. If you go back and watch the finals tape, you'll see her floating in and out of a zone, passing lanes, and all over the place. And Lindsay Morella is taking this to the next level. And this is the future of these defenses, right? We started with hard marks where everyone is floating on very specific people and your entire job is that one person. And now we're starting to see people realize when people are in dangerous positions, when people aren't, and they're shifting in and out of these lanes and zones. And I'm very excited for the future of Quidditch defenses based on that presence.
Yeah, but obviously she's not a one-dimensional player, and her offensively, she just keeps taking more and more steps. Jack, we talked a lot about this during the series, but it feels like, this different offensive set, different from what the Warriors and the former Titans have played, has kind of opened up her game even a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we've always known that Lindsay Morella can pick out passes, can drive. I think, starting last year, the Titans were increasingly, using her passing abilities to really break down opposing defenses, and that has only continued. She's just such a great distributor of the ball, and can make a difference in so many ways. It was just an outstanding series from Lindsay Morella.
Yeah, for sure. On the other side, Nick, a couple names that maybe, haven't had the largest impact, or maybe not the most well known within this Boston squad, stepped up and had huge series. The first one I'll send to you because it's a player you used to coach, Athena Mayor, formerly of the Tufts program. What did you see from her this weekend?
Getting her chance to shine. I mean, Athena's been doing this for years. You and I have seen this on Tufts film, on QCB film, on Boston Pandas. She has been able to play with this composed level. She has played with the ball in her hands for so many years, often ball carrying for this Tufts team in ways we don't even see. It was not just a lot of our Tufts ball carriers tend to bring the ball up and then pass the ball off to some more dynamic playmakers. Athena is that playmaker. I think there's one play in her interview, which is on the back end of Game 3 on the YouTube, is you talk about her shot from behind the hoops, where I have seen players who have played for much longer than Athena has mess that shot up every single time. John has taken advantage of players in that position so many times, and Athena was so composed and so confident throughout the entirety of this series, whether it was as a catch and finish option, a ball carrier up top, driving on people, and playing great point defense as well. When we didn't, Jack talked about the physicality that you don't necessarily see, or showing up in places that you don't necessarily often see. Athena has always been a great on-ball defender, and this weekend she definitely showed that as well.
Yeah, I was scared you were going to kind of shortchange her on the two sides of the ball performance she had, because she was good on the defensive side as well. And yeah, I definitely recommend going and checking out that interview. In the footage, Athena had some incredible things to say, talked really highly of Grace Dastu and her impact on Athena as a player as well. So I would definitely recommend going and checking that out. Jack, the other player I wanted to highlight from Boston is Andrew Steinberg. What did you see from him this weekend?
Yeah, it was so exciting to see Andrew Steinberg get his chance to shine. Was not on a roster for a series until the Washington series earlier this year. So still in the very early stages of his MLQ career. But when he was in the game, the Forge were just feeding him. They were going back to him time and time again in those spaces behind the hoops. And he was receiving passes cleanly and driving and beating people one-on-one. Just a really dynamic presence behind the hoops, sure-handed, physical on the offensive end. just everything that Boston needed from a very young player.
Yeah, because I mean, Nick, a player like Andrew, we've been watching him, we've been coaching against him for years now. I mean, the intangibles have been there for a very long time. There was no question. I mean, he made, USNT Developmental Academy on those intangibles. His athleticism is sneaky, but it's very, very, very much there. He's a very quick player as well, which is, I think, how he was kind of eating the New York defense alive at times when they were playing mark on him. But it just feels like nobody ever found, outside of his Brown program, nobody ever really kind of found a good role for him. It feels like somebody finally did this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is that Andrew is playing in a completely different role from where he played in Brown. At Brown, it was primarily, for a long time, by the time Nationals rolled around, they were passing much more effectively. But for years at this point, it has been a ball drive, maybe last second dish kind of offense, and he's been the facilitator for that offense. And this weekend, he was playing off ball almost consistently, which is super exciting to see. I mean, we've talked about this program ever since the departure of Justin Cole, really needing that dynamic off-ball threat. And maybe they found it, and it certainly looked like it this weekend.
Which is not, of course, also to shortchange Zach Doyle, who has also been
of course,
for them. Yeah. And who had one of the craziest goals I've ever seen when he went flying sideways, the former volleyball player, and just swatted it through the top hoop.
Two is better than none, Ethan.
Two is definitely better than none. That is true. Jack, a lot of the games seem to turn on kind of the shift of Max Havlin and Lou Shu. They were able to dominate the game at times. And usually when Boston would just go on crazy sudden runs, it would be almost all in transition, all off of kind of their dominant play. It feels like we haven't – it feels like they're – sorry. It feels as though they're taking a step, but it's not that they're taking a step. It's just we remember that we haven't seen them in so long because, Lulu went down midway through the Super Series last year, which means we didn't get her for the Boston New York Series. It means we didn't get her for MLQ championships. Then we really didn't get her for all the USQ seasons. And then you have to go all the way back before COVID before we really saw this pair going. What were you seeing from them this weekend?
They're just brilliant to watch. They support each other so well. They press every advantage that they generate to the fullest extent. And it creates so many opportunities for their offense to run in transition, to play a fun Quidditch that gets your team motivated and feeling good about themselves. They're just everything that you could possibly want in a beating pair. It's great to see them returning to the level that they've played at for so many years.
Yeah. Nick, one interesting wrinkle I saw, and I would actually have to go back to see if it was a preset thing or if it was a bit of a seesaw, but it seemed like Shu was getting pushed into more of the engage beater role at times, with Havlin happy to sit back and play more of the free beater role. And we saw some of that from Havlin when he was playing with some other partners, both, last MLQ season, last USQ season. What do you think about that wrinkle within their pairing?
It's super fun to watch. I mean, Lulu has always been a master of the one-on-one engage, period. End of story. It's how she's made her money, so to speak, her entire career. She is so good at it. And by utilizing that skill set, it allows Max whom already was flying around the pitch, just fly around even more. I mean, by the time game 3 came around, the kid's hitting 50-foot throws across the field, like just getting able to fly and play so freely, which is super fun to see. And it's a totally different look. I mean, the fact is that everyone at this point has seen Max play the engage beater, has seen Max dominate at the engage beater. It's been a long time coming that we get to see him just sort of float around and make plays in a completely unique and different way. And that's not to shortchange what Lulu is doing. Lulu is dominating these engages. She is pressing consistently. She doesn't look like someone who just got cleared to play off a torn Achilles 3 months ago. She's doing a phenomenal job continuing to push any advantage, as Jack said.
Yeah. And yeah, if you haven't seen that beat from game 3, it was ridiculous. I think he did make the beat with the knowledge that he had another bludger 5 feet away from him. Regardless, I don't think anybody besides Max Havlin takes that beat, and he hit it squarely. which is absolutely ridiculous. Jack, jumping back across the field, we talked about how we kind of use it as a slight on Boston, fairly so, that John Jackson is just carving them through on no bludgers like there was nothing. But, there is an aspect to that is how strong John Jackson has become as a player. What did you see from him this weekend?
He's just one of, if not the best keeper in the sport right now, period. John Jackson is a player that I want on my team. He can do it on defense. He's just a fearsome defender in the keeper zone, and someone who enabled many of the looks that New York has been throwing all season, just with how he reads the game and his ability to switch and recognize what offenses are going to struggle with. He can execute those coverages, and then on offense, he's strong enough to get through tackles. He makes really good decisions with the ball. He's just everything you could want in a keeper.
Yeah. And credit to New York, and something that Jack and I talked about on the broadcast all season, is that they get all the way through their depth in absolutely every single game. And that kind of led to some, performances that I know, Nick, me and you were talking about earlier today. A player like Avery Oliver, a player we haven't seen a ton of out of the Syracuse program, a player that, again, looked good in college, but it was good seeing her on the pitch, and it was good seeing her, making things matter on the pitch as well.
Yeah, it's this New York team's willingness to play its depth no matter what is going to pay dividends at championships. You have to play all 21 deep. You might even have to play all 25 deep, depending on the substitutions you have to make. I think it's a really, really impressive thing. But it's also, Boston is doing it too, to an extent. They are playing a lot deeper into their depth than they have in the past, which is really great. But New York has made a commitment to do it in every single situation. We're not seeing the second the score tightens up, they go back to their starting line right away. They let the game play. They let people learn how to deal with these high pressure, these unique situations that you can only get in game experience to teach these. You can't teach a next goal win nerves in a practice. You can teach all the right things to do, but the second those nerves turn on, that's when it gets really difficult, and New York is finding ways to teach through it.
Yeah, and it's giving the team so much energy when it goes right. It doesn't always go right. People have to have the opportunity to make mistakes, but when a player like Zach Armintrading comes into the game and just rips through a couple tackles and gets a dunk, or Avery Oliver is working on the wings, looking like a young Lindsey Morella, passing the ball and scoring. That's just what a team feeds on, especially like a close-knit team that's been practicing all summer, like a lot of MLQ franchises. I think under the leadership of Frank Minson, it's just something that the Titans are doing really well this summer, and can be a lesson for every team in the league.
And the last point I want to touch on, and then we'll kind of move on talking about the other couple teams and get our interview in, because somehow we haven't managed to mention probably arguably the MVP of the series, besides Athena, I would say, for Boston, which is Ian Skura. We haven't said the name once, which could be the same issue I brought up with the Lindsey Morella point, which is that sometimes it's not as fun to talk about stars. But Ian, offensively at this point, is carving up defenses absolutely at will. He has a incredible connection with Zach Doyle that, after kind of slowing down in the Washington series, picked up again this weekend. He's so hard to tackle in the open field. He's shooting before beaters can even make the desperation. Jack, talk a little bit on Ian and what you're seeing from him right now.
Yeah, I saw so much growth this weekend from Ian Skura, because I know Ian's played against lots of different defenses before, but the zone, or the hoop zone defense that Washington threw at Boston earlier in the season, I think really stumped Ian Skura for a little bit, or he didn't know how best that he could make an impact on the game. He was distributing more and playing a role, which is maybe what the team needed for him against the Admirals. But when New York went to a similar defense, a hoop zone, which is designed to stop mid-range shooting, Skura was driving through the point defenders and just picking his moments, obviously working behind great beaters, but finishing at the hoops. So showing that the defense that is designed to stop him can't really stop him. Um, so lots of growth I saw in a couple short weeks.
Yeah, I'm very excited where Ian is going. I think the number one most telling thing is on offense when he goes to drive. It used to be that he would drive and he would shed defenders as they made contact. These defenders are getting within a foot of him and not making contact. It is truly incredible to watch sort of the stop and go play that Ian has built into his game, knowing that maybe while he is a fast player and can move, he's not necessarily engaging in the John Jackson, Augie Monroe kind of style of I'm going to take the contact and slip out of it. It is I'm not even going to let you touch me. And that's really a very impressive. That is so hard to do, period. And he's pulling it off in spades.
Yeah, for sure. So the East Division, as we mentioned, is almost over. It has one game to be completed, Game 3 of Washington versus Boston, a game that was stopped in the end game when the lights at the complex went out. Currently, Boston needs 4 goals to get to the set score, and Washington needs 5. If I have those numbers slightly wrong, I apologize. The stakes of the game are very high. If Boston wins that game, they're the East Division champions. If Boston loses that game, they fall to the 3rd seed. They have to play in the play-in bracket on Saturday morning. If Washington wins the game, they're the 2nd seed. If they lose the game, they're the one in the play-in bracket. New York has locked up, by virtue largely of how many stitches they caught this season, a top 2 spot and a guaranteed spot in the quarterfinals. But they win the division if Washington beats Boston, and they finish 2nd if Boston beats Washington. The good wrinkle for New York now is that they've guaranteed they're in the quarterfinals. They're playing one of the 2 North Division teams, the 1st or 2nd place team. Definitely a place that New York could make a run from. But let's just touch on Washington really quickly here and kind of what we think, whether we think they can beat this Boston team and kind of what kind of mark they can make at championships. Nick, I'll start with you. You had a wry smile on your face.
Absolutely, they can beat this Boston team. I mean, they've done it once already this season. They have arguably the deepest quaffle core in the league, and all it takes is this is an unknown situation. We have never played in a MLQ game immediately coming off of anything a 1st to 4 for effectively the division. Not necessarily that Washington can win the division, but that's the case, right? Like this is huge. This is a chance for them to not have to play in that play-in bracket they so desperately wanted to avoid last year. So they absolutely can. I mean, I think it depends on if their beaters can play to parity. We talked a lot about this leading into the season. This beater core seems to be playing to win a lot, and I don't necessarily know if they can play to win hyper aggressively against Boston, because if you mess that up, that's 3 quick goals the other way, and maybe the game is over before it even begins. But if they continue to play focused and let that quaffle core build, you're going to see a potentially very deadly Washington team who could win the MLQ title if all goes well.
Yeah, Jack, we've talked a lot. I feel like our takeaway from a lot of series all across the league this season has kind of been, yeah, but where's the physicality? Rochester's obviously been an exception to that in a big way. But I think Washington has been to a good deal too. What we saw this weekend of Ian and John just driving through entire teams, Washington really wasn't letting either of them do that. Both teams at least had to work a little bit more for their goals. So, what do you think that physicality might mean for Washington going down the stretch here?
Yeah, I think you're right that Washington has been a really physical team. When they were playing in Boston, it was John Sheridan and Justin Kramer just flying around the pitch, making hits, and really affecting how Boston wanted to play. So I'm going to be looking to see if those players are making the trip on the roster. It's going to be a tough line for both teams to walk, though, because you have to bring aggression and urgency in such a unique situation. But you also have to keep your heads. A penalty is so much more costly. And just generally, you have no margin to let the other team go on a run. So you really have to be keyed in and focused, and it's going to be really interesting to see what both teams bring.
Yeah, and beyond playing for a division title, or a chance at a higher seed, the loser, as we mentioned, is the third seed. The third seed in this division, then qualifying for the quarterfinals, almost assuredly, there's like some weird reasons where it wouldn't be the case, would be playing Austin Saturday night in the quarterfinals. That's what these teams are playing to avoid. My question for both of you, and it's a short answer because we're about to go to our interview. Do you think both these teams can beat Austin? And if one can, one can't, what are your opinions on that? I'll go to Nick first.
Yes. Boston has the beating. Boston has had a consistent offense and has a bona fide superstar leading this offense. And Washington has the best quaffle core in the game on paper.
Jack, agree?
Yeah, I also agree. I think it's maybe a little tougher for Washington. They have a bunch of players who've been with the Boston program and beaten Austin before. But otherwise, as a group, the Admirals haven't done it. And the matches last summer in the quarterfinals, some were close, if I remember correctly, but it didn't go to 3 games. So the Admirals group is not a team that has beaten Austin before, and I think that matters. You don't want to be feeling deja vu on Saturday night of the MLQ championships. If you're Washington, you want that bye to avoid Austin.
Yeah. And I will say Washington gave Austin, I would say, probably their best match of the entire championship on that Saturday night. I don't think this team, players like their first line, stocked full of Team USA and Team USA quality players, are not going to be intimidated by anybody. And I think they're a better team than the team who gave Austin a good run last year. I think this Austin team is probably a worse team than that Austin team was. So I definitely think both these teams could take it to Austin. It's going to be really interesting. I think championships is going to be absolutely insane this year. There is a lot of parity at even if it's a bit of tiered parity, that tiered parity is now going to play out in different tiers of the bracket. I think the play-in bracket is going to be an absolute bloodfest, and I think some of our bracket matchups are going to be really, really exciting. So I'm looking forward to it. Real quick before we go to our guest, just to break down the scenarios in the South this week, because San Antonio and League City are playing. If League City wins the series or takes even one game, they make it to championships. If they win, yes, if they win the series, they become the 2 seed in the group. And then if they get swept, New Orleans does qualify. San Antonio's the 2 seed, and Kansas City is actually locked in the 3 seed no matter what. So Kansas City, another super, super talented team that is going to be in that play-in bracket, which is going to be fun to watch. But we're going to throw it over now and bring in our guest, former analyst of MLQ Replay before he ditched us to go get a head coaching gig in Ottawa. Darren Bell. Darren, thanks so much for coming back with us tonight.
Thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to be back here with you guys. I have missed you guys so much, and it's an absolute pleasure to come talk more Quidditch with you guys.
We've missed you a lot too. I want to start with your team before we have you, dole out some analysis of the rest of the East Division as well. Take us a little bit through your team's journey. Obviously, you guys are super young. Ottawa's very much in a transition phase in Quidditch right now. So kind of what's all the entire season been like for your team?
Yeah, so this entire season has been an absolute journey for us. Like you said, we do have a lot of young players, and a lot of these players this year, it's their first debut in MLQ ever. And if they were in MLQ before, it might have been for most of us, our last time seeing it was 2019, and then even people before that, it was way before that. So like back when we had the old jerseys and everything. So it was a lot of it was definitely a new experience coming back in. And of course, a lot of these players had only played in QC before coming into here, and had never played in the States before, or and never played to that type of caliber. Some of our beating core actually it was their first time ever like beating ever. So it was a lot of trying to coach up and trying to bring up into that. And so it was a lot of growth was the main focus for this season, and also trying to get back up to speed, because a lot of us, like, we didn't even have a full college season this year. So it was just getting back into the swing of things and getting everybody back into fitness and back onto a more modern mental thought process of the game, because of how much it has changed over COVID.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the States probably aren't even aware of how much, because of a much slower rollout of the vaccine in Canada, how much longer you guys were not playing Quidditch. We were back for MLQ. You guys weren't really playing Quidditch. We were back in USQ. You guys still weren't playing Quidditch. Definitely a longer journey back. And obviously that's had its effects. You've mentioned growth, and I just wanted you to, give you the floor to shout out some of your players that you feel have really grown a lot over the course of this season.
Yeah, definitely. A big thing that was for me coming into this was defense, and trying to get our defensive rotations out. And one person that really took to was Matthew the Beast Brockman. He really surprised me, especially like coming into tryouts. And then seeing his growth, really worked his way up from more of the lower lines up into more like into the second line, and really showing out with the defense that we were going through this season. Absolutely stellar. I'm super excited to see where he goes with it, because this was his debut year for MLQ as well. And so being able to make some hits and seeing him grow throughout the year, or throughout this entire season. Also, one of our beaters, Rivage, Alex Rivage, his growth was insane. That's one of the beaters where it was like first time playing Quidditch, or quad ball, playing quad ball now, coming into this, and what a way to get woken up by New York. So that was a way to wake up. And so seeing Rivy's growth from then all the way up to now, and his dedication coming to every practice, and being able to learn, was absolutely phenomenal. So those are like two huge shout outs that I want to bring to. Also, one more shout out, she really stepped up this weekend for us on the defensive side, on the physicality, was Emily Naftel. I've played with her for years, ever since I first started. So I've known her for 4 going on 5 years now. And so her defensive status, and she's been working on her strength this season coming into it, has been absolutely phenomenal. So fantastic for her, and I'm really excited to see where they continue, and if they stay with Black Bears, how they can be those outstanding players that we need to step up.
Yeah, awesome. And here at MLQ, at least for the next month, we're using the two terms pretty interchangeably, so you can't really be in the wrong, whichever way you choose to go. So when we've talked to some of the teams that do have a lot of younger players, we were talking to Ryan Sue from Detroit last week, and there seems to be, especially some energy, and playing in a season like this now can kind of get people more excited to both continue in their MLQ program, or in your case, like a QC program. So are you kind of seeing that from your team, and kind of what does like the QC profile look like in the Ottawa area?
So the QC profile in the Ottawa area. So for those who don't know, for the Ottawa Black Bears, we mainly pull from 3 universities, which is Carleton, U Ottawa, and McGill. You'll see a lot of our beating core from U Ottawa and McGill, and then a lot of our main chaser lines are from Carleton, and then Queens alumni. Not many active Queens players, or actually there's not active players on Queens on this roster this year. But that's kind of like how it is for QC, but it's the energy that we're bringing from this. They came in with the right mentality, which is that, like, when we got hit by like New York, one, we didn't have our main roster out there. It was a lot of brand new people, and they didn't get discouraged by that. So they didn't get discouraged by it, and they continued to come and wanted to keep growing. And a lot of our chasing side as well, even in our depth line. So they continue to want to keep growing. And so that's something that I'm really excited to see going into the QC, because now a lot of people have really stepped up on their physicality and into their fitness. And so I don't think they know it yet, but this is a hard division. And so we know how hard this team runs. And so if we had and when we went to Toronto, those people are like, oh my gosh, like we can hit these people. Like we get to, like, Emily Nafto came off the line and was like, I can tackle every single person out there. I'm like, yes, you can. And she did. It was phenomenal. So I'm excited to see where they take it continuing forward into the QC, because it's not, like, obviously it's not as hard a division here in northern Canada, but I'm excited to see where they bring it.
Yeah, and I think it was evident, while all the results, all went in one direction, the quality of those results definitely changed over time, and it was definitely easy to see in the video, and that's testament to your players' dedication as well as your team's coaching. And like you said, I don't think there's ever been a tougher division than this year's East Division. Maybe last year's East Division. That's probably about it. It just becomes such a loaded area of Quidditch, with all these cities just kind of taking in all these players. And like you said, it's kind of the opposite up in Canada, because you mentioned Ottawa and McGill. For people who don't know Canadian Quidditch history, those are the biggest historic programs in Canadian Quidditch. It's just that all those people graduated and moved to Toronto.
Yep.
Which does seem to be the general flow of the young population in Canada, based on my minimal knowledge of Canadian demographics. But
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, you're totally right. Like, a lot of our players, like, they grow up here, or they go to school here, we train them up and everything, and then they move right down to where all the jobs are in Toronto, and then or in the GTA type of area, and then Raiders kind of take over from there. So it's always a challenge, but I love the recruitment, and I love and especially heads up, like a big shout out to the coaching staff helping out this year, and helping grow and helping grow that physicality that players needed.
Awesome. So since we have you back, we're going to have you do some analysis, kind of maybe touch on some of the points we've touched on already this episode. We'll keep you in the East Division. We won't make you, go crazy all across the league, but since you have played all these teams, one question we all answered at the beginning of the show is who we thought the strongest team in the East Division was out of Boston, New York, and Washington, based right now on performance, not on record or anything. What's your opinion on that topic?
My opinion actually is that Boston team. We faced them, and it doesn't show quite in the score yet, but they were also facing us with more of their depth that they had. But the thing that I think that hasn't been mentioned yet from listening from you guys is the kudos to the coaching staff. The coaching staff that they have at Boston, and be able to take the players that they have now and their depth players, and being able to coach them up to a point when they can face off in tough situations, or when they need them, they can step up. Also, that beating core, man, like it's beautiful to see, and like having, like, as we know, as all of us playing Quidditch, like, beating is like 75. Like, you need lanes to be made in order to make drives, and when you make drives, like, that opens up options. And so I think, like, this beating core is still as dominant as it has been in past years. And so and I think going into this, if this is another question coming up, but in going into this this Washington thing, those players, like, their depth has more experience now. And especially playing in this New York series a bit. But then also, when it's only a game to 40, this is something that's also, it's a game to 40. Washington has the depth. Like, they have amazing depth, like, all the way down the roster list. But when you're looking at the top lines and your top beater core, like, we're looking at top 2 lines, we're only going to 40. That's like one line out there. So you're talking top beater line core, and when Boston wants to put it out there, top chasing line, that's hard to beat. So especially coming into that. But overall, I do think it is that Boston team.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And I think Nick touched on this earlier, how unique this situation is. I mean, you don't have to make a sub in this game. These players can play a game to 4 or 5 points, no problem. You can literally just say, this is our best line, and we're going to play it for the next, 7 or 8 minutes until a winner's determined. And that's kind of crazy. It'll be interesting to see what teams choose to do that versus not choosing to do that as we get into that game. We all know here, because we worked with you last year, that you put a ton of time into film viewing, but players change over time, and also it's different to see people in person versus seeing them on film. Were there any players in the East Division that really wowed you that maybe you didn't expect? Like, you obviously expected Max Happen to wow you in Louis Shu, but anybody in the entire division that really stood out to you?
Someone that really, the first person that comes to mind is actually from Charlotte. Charlotte, man, the name escapes me. Number 99, new keeper.
It's Manowar, right?
Yeah. And great guy too. Absolutely fantastic. I got to talk with him on the side. Oh my gosh, he's great. And especially when it comes to snitch on pitch, his twitchiness, and he's still young. Like he's only 22, right? So like I can't wait to see where he goes on, and he's learned a lot this year. Like seeing him from earlier series, and then seeing him come into the Super Series. It was really great to see, and to have him into those snitch on pitch periods to climb those points that they needed. That really stood out to me. Fantastic job. So when you ask that question, that's the first name or the first person that popped into my mind.
Yeah, that's a great call. Everybody on the show is really high. I don't remember if I workshopped this take on air, but the take that I think he's going to be the best quaffle player on Charlotte, like by championships, if he isn't already.
Yes.
So I'm excited to see what he can do at championships and kind of what positions they put him in. Another thing we've talked about with this East Division is, and we were talking about it earlier in this episode as well, is really the complex defensive shifts that they've been making, something we haven't always seen in Quidditch. As somebody who was coaching against them, were you kind of surprised, or did this kind of take you aback as you were in your prep? And what do you kind of think about kind of this change in the way East Division's been just handling the entire idea of defense in quad ball?
Yeah, so I'll go on to the point on like coaching it, because it was kind of like some of these shifts that we've seen, because like some of these shifts we didn't see in Canada, and so it was something that like maybe like we saw a bit in the States coming into the season, and then even when we have these shifts coming in now, like when we first went up against New York, this high press that was brought on, they played that really well with their coaching. And their coaching staff, because they knew who they were facing. They knew, and then being able to put those points up for the point differential if it came down to something similar to this, if it comes down to it, was really good. But I do love these defensive shifts, because everyone's trying something. And that's why you're seeing a lot of these higher scores, and we're seeing a lot of different rotations happening. So it's also trying to teach that to a young core going into this, going into each of these series, and being like, you have to look for these shifts, and you have to look for these matchups. You see this, that means they're playing this. These are their kind of zones that they're running. It's definitely difficult, but it makes coaching a lot more fun, because and you have to be more active on it. It's not just like, okay, this is what you're seeing. Oh, they're running 2-2. This is how they're doing their zones and that type of thing. You can be like, okay, well, who's at hoops? Who's up on point? How are they running? That was so awesome, is that because a defense that is predictable is a defense that's beatable. And so I think that you give this a little bit more time, and you will see a more stellar defense and a lot lower scores going forward.
Yeah, I believe it was Ashton Jean Lewis, the head coach of League City, who tweeted early in the season about the amount of prep it's taking in MLQ right now, and how you need to have 3 offenses prepped for 3 different defensive sets. I think we poked fun of it a little bit earlier in the show, but I mean, it is true.
True.
Most of the history of Quidditch has been, we know exactly what they're going to throw at us, and this is how we're going to break it down. And it's really different now, where these teams have to have multiple offenses planned for a single match. They have to be accurately IDing, but then it's even IDing within those defenses, where the green headband is in his zone. It's kind of like the Mike linebacker almost kind of concept in football.
Yeah.
So sorry, I don't mean to throw football terms at a Canadian. I apologize, but I'm just messing with you there.
You do not have to apologize for that.
Yeah, but it's really been interesting. It's gonna be fun to see how it goes in the championship. before we let you go, Darren, I just wanted to give you one last chance. If there's anybody else, involved in the program or just your whole team that you just want to shout out before we call it.
Again, another huge shout out to the coaching staff. Couldn't have done it without all of you guys. And just wanted to mention, this was an entire shift. So a shout out to the entire team, because the main goal for this was defense, and also to get more ball movement that we've seen in past years. And so that was a bit of especially with a new core and people that haven't really seen or played together a lot. They absorbed it in. And tried the best that they could. And when we had our rotations, our defensive rotations on point, and when they were there, we made these stops, especially in that Charlotte in that first Charlotte game for the first about 10-12 minutes of game time. But it was a fantastic, and it was a pleasure to the head coach. And then maybe I'll see you guys at championships. Thinking of maybe making my way down. We'll see. I don't know. I'm ready. Let's go, Ethan. I'm ready to go. Put me in, coach.
We've got plenty of in between game time for you just to fill up with some great analysis. We'd love to have you there.
I would love to be there. That'd be awesome.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. We'll let you get back. I know it's a holiday down there, so go enjoy time with the family, and we will hopefully see you at championships.
Hopefully see you guys at championships. Thank you very much.
Awesome. All right, so that's going to put another episode of MLQ Replay in the book. Just going to break down the schedule really fast going forward. First thing, not technically an MLQ event, but if you care enough about Quidditch that you're watching MLQ Replay, August 5th, Friday at noon, I expect that you'll have a device or a TV tuned to ESPN for a huge moment in the sport when we will get to see Team USA and the Team USA Developmental Academy play a game on ESPN. From there, Saturday, August 6th, we will have our last full series of the season in MLQ with League City hosting San Antonio. And then a week after that, on August 13th, we will have the conclusion of Washington-Boston, which will also decide the East Division, as we said. Next week, we will be having one last standard edition of MLQ Replay. It'll be a South-focused one. We will talk about both the Super Series that happened this weekend and the series that's to come next weekend. In 2 weeks, after everything is said and done, we will have one of our favorite guests, Cody Narveson, friend of the program, on to make the selection for Minneapolis, which team they will choose to face in their quarterfinal, whether it'll be the second place team in the South Division or the second place team in the East Division. Neither team of which is decided yet. That's how much is still to play for in this crazy, crazy MLQ season. And then, of course, August 20th and August 21st, MLQ championships. We'll all be down there. The MLQ Network will be rocking all weekend long. Even Harry Clark, our producer, will be there. It's always a special time when Harry's there. And then August 22nd, that Monday, Take Back the Pitch, which will also be being streamed all day long on the MLQ Network. A great, great event. So, yeah, we hope you tune in or show up to all of that. We've got a great month of Quidditch to come. I'm Ethan Sturm with Jack McGovern, with Nick Jablonski, with our guest and former analyst, Darren Bell, and, of course, with our producer, Harry Clark. Thank you so much for watching. We will talk to you next week. Take care.